Where was the Garden of Eden? Have you ever wondered where the Garden of Eden was? Many people assume the Middle East because Genesis mentions the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and those rivers flow in the Middle East. But this is a wrong assumption. You see, the Bible describes 4 rivers coming from one head and flowing through Eden. This isn't true of today's Tigris and Euphrates rivers, so they can't be the ones described in Genesis. And besides, under those rivers are thousands of feet of fossil record which was formed during Noah's flood. We just don't know where the Garden of Eden was, and any remnant, well, it was destroyed during the global flood of Noah's day.
This brings me to the start of our journey, cartography. This is the science of making maps. Now, if we go back in time and look for the oldest known map of the world, what do we find? Well, we come across this map of Anaxander. This map is the oldest we know of, and it was made from the knowledge of what man knew about the world at this time, almost 2,600 years ago, around 600 BC. Basically, you're only looking at the Middle East. This next oldest map comes 100 years later. It was published in the Travels Around the World by Heractatus around 500 BC. The map still shows that they had very limited knowledge of the world. We see an empty Europe, as they didn't even know what mountains or rivers existed there. They only showed Northeast Africa and didn't even know where the Nile River ended. And we also see a very small portion of Western Asia. But looking at the map, we do see a theme. Both have the center of the world in the Middle East. Here is the next oldest map, going all the way to the 16th century, so much later, yet still not much change regarding knowledge on the entirety of the world. We again see Jerusalem is the center of the world, but in much greater detail. Now, the reason I show you all of this is because we are now going to look at old maps made from ancient biblical texts that predate all of these maps that I just shown. These were made from various texts written about 1200 BC and earlier. So remember, these maps come from text written over 3,222 years ago and older. The first map we're going to be looking at, unfortunately, is very hard to read, but the map shows a large portion of the world. We can see all of northwestern Europe, all the way to the ocean. Then we see to the east more of Europe and detailed rivers in it. But 2 things stand out. One, we have Mount Zion in the middle. Now, Mount Zion is known as the Mountain of God. This region is Israel, and it is again at the center of the earth. We also notice that in the far east on the map, we notice 2 words, Garden and Eden. Now that is interesting, because Eden should be to the south of the Tigris and Euphrates River in the basin. It is not. But let's go on. We see the exact same thing on the next map. Broken up on this next map is Noah's 3 sons' inheritance. We see Japheth, who inherited northwest Europe and detailed mountain ranges. We see Ham, who inherited Africa with the details of an ocean all the way to the south of the continent named the Aral Sea. And in Shem's territory is where all the fun begins. We see again, the middle of the map is Israel. We can clearly see the area said to be the Garden of Eden. At the base of the Tigris and Euphrates River today, where I have placed a question mark, is not there. Yet, if we look to the north on the map, you will see I placed a red arrow where it says Eden. Now, what do we know from this map? Well, the red arrow in the middle left, pointing to a mountain range, is that of the Himalaya Mountains. So Eden is past the Himalayan mountain range on this map. But let's dig even further. This next map is much better, and you can read it more clear. We see that in the middle is yet again Mount Zion, or Israel. To the south, we see Mount Sinai, very close to it. And yes, this is where Mount Sinai is today. So it's overall pretty good so far. We notice to the east of both of these is another mountain range. It is really large on the map. And based on it being north of an ocean, this could only be the Himalayan mountain range yet again. But there's more. We see an island to the south named Mountains of Fire on the map. This is curious. I found that there was a row of islands that are pure volcanoes just to the northwest of Australia. To top it off, I looked up what it's locally called, and they're named Gunung Api. This translates into Fire Mountains. All of these clues are like a puzzle that are leading us down a trail to finding the actual Garden of Eden. Now this next map is a little confusing because it's just one section of a layered map that comes from the Book of Enoch. So even though it's more vague, I chose it because I was able to see a similar theme. Mount Zion in exactly the center of the map, with Mount Sinai very close of it and to the south. And then far away to the east, we can find the Garden of Eden yet again. However, I did notice something. The two red arrows at the bottom point to a ring on the map that represent an ocean. So if we follow that ring up and around to the east, where we find Eden, it's actually across the ocean. Now the pieces are really starting to fit together. Our next map, much more clear. Starting in the middle, we see again Mount Zion, aka Israel. Directly to the side of it is Mount Sinai. So again, common theme. Looking to the north, however, is all of Shem's territory, which is Asia. So if you were looking at this map today from above, it should be turned to the right, because you are looking essentially to the east. But on this map, it looks to the north. Now, what does this map show us? Yet again, if we follow the Tigris and Euphrates River to where the local flood proponents believe the Garden of Eden is, what do we find? Nothing is mentioned. That's why there's a question mark there. Yet, if we keep going, what do we notice? The Garden of Eden is in another location, farther away. And we can notice that on the perimeter of Ham's territory, on the far right, we see again the Mountains of Fire. And if you follow it north, it goes right up to the Garden of Eden, where they end. So again, more clues. Now, last but not least, the most clear map of them all, created by Philip Alexander. In it, we can see everything we would need to know from all of the other maps, but in one place. We see Mount Zion in the middle, next to Mount Sinai. Then, past the Tigris and Euphrates, not in the Delta or anywhere in the Persian Gulf, we find paradise at the waters of the Great Abyss. Now what could that be? It's only the ocean. We also see another Mountains of Fire to the right. So now we have all the puzzle pieces we could ever need to help us make a modern day map and find the true location of Eden. This brings us to where can we find the most detailed account of topography in all of Scripture? Well, this hands down goes to no other than the Book of Jubilees. Now, for those who do not know, Jubilees is not found in your Bible because it was found much more recently, between the years 1947 and 1956. They approximately found about 15 Jubilee scrolls in the 5 caves of Qumran, all written in Hebrew. The text ended up being so amazing that they named it the Little Genesis. Details of Genesis are much greater in this book, so I love it. In it, we can find detailed accounts of not only genealogies, but migration patterns, and of course, directions. And a literal map of the world can actually be made from these texts. And this is all in a time when people had no idea how big the world really was. The details are found in inheritance. When we read that an angel gave Noah detailed information regarding borders for each of his sons to inherit forever, and in them we can take modern day maps of the world and literally trace out the directions that the angel gave to Noah. And that is what I have done. So let's begin with Shem's territory, since his has the 3 sacred places on it. So join me as we now read through the geographical territories and borders presented in the Book of Jubilees. Shem's lineage and territories begin in the Book of Jubilees chapter 8. We read, Shem and his sons unto the generations forever, the whole land of Eden, and the whole land of the Red Sea, and the whole land of to the east of India, and to the Red Sea, and the mountains thereof, and all of the land of Bashan, and to all the land of Lebanon, and to the islands of Kaftur, which are the largest islands in the Mediterranean, and all of the mountains of Sanir and Amana, and the mountains of Ashur, which are the Armenian mountains in the north, and all the land of Elam, Ashur, and Babel, and Suzan, and Medi, and all the mountains of Ararat, and all of the regions beyond the sea, which is beyond the mountains of Ashur towards the north, a blessed and spacious land, and all that is very good. And we also read in Jubilees that the land of Shem is neither hot nor cold, but a blend of both. Unlike Japheth, which we read inherited the cold lands and Ham inherited the hot lands, Shem's portions and territories were a mix of both. We also find an extremely detailed information in chapter 8, as this defines the borders of these territories. We read, Shem's lot, the middle of the earth, which he should take as his inheritance for himself and his sons for the generations of eternity, from the middle of the mountains of Rapha, which are the Ural mountains of today that run up Russia, from the mouth of the waters of the river Tina, and his portion towards the west through the midst or the middle of this river, and it extends until it reaches the waters of the abyss, which would be the Black Sea, out of which this river goes forth and pours its waters into the Sea of Ma'it, which is the Mediterranean Sea. And this river flows into the Great Sea, or North Atlantic. And all that is towards the north is Japheth's, and all that is towards the south belong to Shem. Now we go to the next border, and it extends until it reaches Karaso. This is the bosom of the tongue which looks towards the south. This is the tip of India, or the Indus Valley, and his portion extends along the Great Sea, and it extends in a straight line until it reaches the west of the tongue, which looks towards the south. For this sea is named the tongue of the Egyptian Sea, or as we know today, the Red Sea. And it turns from here towards the south, towards the mouth of the Great Sea, on the shores of its waters, and it extends to the west of Afra, which is Africa. And it extends till it reaches the waters of the river Gihon. This is Aby River, or the Blue Nile in Africa. And to the south of the waters of Gihon, to the banks of its river, and it extends towards the east till it reaches the Garden of Eden, and to the south of it, and from the east of the whole land of Eden, and of the whole east, which is all of Shem's territory, Asia, or the Orient, and it turns to the west and proceeds until it reaches the east side of the mountain of Rapha, which are again the Ural Mountains, and it descends to the bank of the mouth of the river Tina. So as you can see, we see a detailed map of all of the land of Shem and his descendants that they inherited forever. This tells us where Eden was, where Mount Sinai is, and where Mount Zion is, because he inherited all of them on his lands. So a detailed map of this part of the world that could never have been known during this time. Fascinating. The next territory we are going to look at is Ham's. The reason why is that I believe this description portrays the earth as being round. We read, And for Ham came forth the second portion beyond the Gihon and towards the south, this is the southern hemisphere, and to the right of the garden. Now, there is only one possible way for Ham from Africa to reach to the right side of the Garden of Eden location, no matter where it is on Shem's territory, without going all the way around the earth. I see no option here, unless of course we have some weird kind of Pac-Man paradox going on. But if the earth is flat, then I struggle to see it using these directions. We'll continue. And it extends towards the south, and it extends to the mountains of fire, which are a row of volcanoes found in Indonesia, still called fire mountains in Indonesian today. And it extends towards the west to the Sea of Atel, which is the Indian Ocean. And it extends towards the west until it reaches the Sea of Ma'uk, which is named after Ham's wife, the current-day South Atlantic Sea, into which everything which was not destroyed descends. And it goes forth towards the north to the limits of Gadin, which is modern-day Spain. And from there, it goes forth to the coast of the waters of the sea, to the waters of the Great Sea, till it draws near the river of Gihon. And it goes along from the river Gihon until it reaches the right of the Garden of Eden. So we see a gigantic circle. His land wraps around the entire south of the earth. You will notice that the Gihon being described here is the same Gihon in Genesis 2:13 that encircles the entire land of Cush. This is the reason that Ethiopians have always identified the Gihon with the Abi River or the Blue Nile, which encircles the former kingdom of Gojam, or in the ancient maps, Goyam. But why is this important? Well, for a few reasons. It shows us the validity of Scripture and how it must be inspired. There is no option. There is no possible way for man to have known this much of the world at that time. It shows us where Eden actually was and where all humanity actually began, and that the story is truly history and not allegorical. We have a literal place where literal people lived at a literal time in history. Now that we have looked at the oldest maps made from both secular historians, explorers, and the ancient biblical text itself, let's now look at maps specifically made by explorers after the time of Jesus, aka 2024 years ago. What you are going to see is that they are all going to validate the location of Eden mentioned in these ancient biblical texts beyond a shadow of a doubt. And it disproves the modern day idea that Eden was in the Middle East by the Red Sea, where the Tigris and Euphrates River flow into. Let's start with the Cosmos map of the world. This map is 1,000 years later from the first map we looked at, the map of Alexander. You will notice that not much more of the world is yet known. Cosmas was a merchant monk from Alexander of Egypt. He was a 6th century explorer that traveled as a merchant of the Red Sea and Indian Ocean around 550 AD. His descriptions of India are invaluable to historians. Here are some of the different images of his map. It's pretty small and vague, but let's look at this map. This one is probably the best quality of all of them. But let's look at a better modern day rendition, made legible so we can really determine what's going on. As you can see, not much more of the world is even known yet. But what I would like you to notice is that we can see that in the middle is Jerusalem, even though it is not marked. To the left is the Mediterranean Sea and the Nile River flowing through it. And to the right, you can see the modern day Tigris River flowing into the Persian Gulf, also known as the Red Sea. If you follow the ocean trail, it takes you to the Garden of Eden, far to the east, in a group of islands. 100 years later, in 650 AD, we get the Reverent world map from Italy. This one is amazing. To me, besides the even earlier biblical map, of course, this is the best one yet, out of all of the different versions to this point. Just look as I overlay the actual Google image of Earth over this map, and you can see the shape generally matches pretty good. Notice something else? We can see India clearly, and if we keep following the ocean, yet again, we land on paradise. And yet again, somewhere near the Philippines. And if I had to be really specific, I would choose this region right here. Yes, Eden is now under the ocean, but the spring that came up in the midst of the garden now comes up in this very location still to this day. This underwater spring flows out and spills into a basin that has the most diversity of life anywhere on Earth. The criteria for Eden matches this location perfectly. The minerals that are found there and not in the Middle East, the plants that grow there and not in the Middle East, the herbs and spices that come from there. And if you watched my last video on the quest for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we discovered that the tree only grows in this region of the world, and again, not in the Middle East. Next, we have a Spanish map of the world from 787 AD, running until about 970 AD when it was recopied over and over. Zooming in, we can see Africa in the middle, with Judea to the north, and India way up north to the edge of the map. And as you can see, it goes off into the ocean. If you follow that ocean, you land on the biblical paradise with Adam and Eve covering their nakedness with leaves and a serpent in the garden. This map, looking at it today, would be tilted to the right, but like most of the ancient maps, they were oriented to the north. Next, we go to France, 1050 AD. This is better known as the Buttes of Libana map of the world. There are no surviving original examples, but we have different artistic renditions made over time. But the typical theme is found. We see the Red Sea leading into the ocean, and following that ocean, we again land on paradise. And you can see Adam and Eve there as well. Next, we go to the map of 1120 AD, called the Lambert of Saint-Omer map. This comes from France. This one is oriented differently as well, again with the east at the top. But we can see all we need to find Eden. In it, we see India. And off the coast, we see Sri Lanka, and then following the ocean, we land on biblical paradise, and we can see the 4 rivers flowing from it. Now we go to the 1300 AD map from England. This one is called the Hereford Mappamundi. It is the largest surviving map of the world from the Middle Ages. In it, we can see all of Europe, Asia, and Africa, with Jerusalem in the middle, and the Red Sea flows into the ocean. And as we follow the ocean, yet again, we find the Garden of Eden. And last but not least, we have the 1490 map of Christopher Columbus. And in the map, we see a large body from the map with the layout and the design of the continents, and it is the best yet. But in another section of the map, you will notice there is an isolated circular map with extreme details if we zoom in. That is where we want to focus our attention. And as we zoom in, we can recognize Africa, but little else, including the writing. Luckily for us, we have a book to help us decipher what all of this is. You will notice, first off, that we can see India and China to the east of Africa, with the island of Sri Lanka off the coast of India. Going east, we go through the Malay Peninsula and come to a bowl of islands with paradise written right in the middle. Here we can see Christopher Columbus's chart remade in English to help us better understand this map from that book. It makes it very clear that the Garden of Eden is nowhere near Jerusalem, which we can see in the middle of the map, but far off into the east off the coast of a group of islands. So time and time again, we have explorers discovering islands that for some reason they all claim was the original location of Eden, just as the ancient lost biblical texts describe, given to Noah from an angel over 3,000 years ago. I believe the misconception about the location of the Garden of Eden being in the Middle East all comes from the idea that the names of the 2 rivers that are found there. And I believe that when people got off the ark and began naming new locations, they just used old names of rivers that existed before. I personally believe that this is what confuses people the most and why they are looking in the wrong place for Eden. So in closing, we have the ancient biblical text found hidden in a cave in Qumran, famous as the Dead Sea Scrolls, and one of the scrolls, which was named Jubilees, is where we read about how Noah was given a map of the world by angels. This was all for Noah to distribute lands to his children for future inheritance. Since Noah would have not known what the world looked like at all, it fell upon God to help Noah map it out. So when we take these directions and plot them on a map of the world today, it shows us the world as we know it. And as you can see, this is far before any maps of the time, and even much later from that time, could have ever known this type of detail or information about the world. Since we know that the Dead Sea Scrolls were buried over 2,000 years ago, it is obvious that they existed long before that. So how could such old text written at least 100 years before Christ or much earlier have so much detail in them when no one else in the world even knew anything about that part of the world? Scripture is full of prophetic text and amazing layers of hidden knowledge, but this evidence shows you that there is divine inspiration embedded in the text that should not be there unless it is not of this world. Think about it. A man and his family got off a boat in the middle of a random foreign mountain range, and now the father has to give his kids land so they each have an inheritance. How can he plot out anything without knowing the topography? He couldn't just have pointed in one direction and said, okay, you go that direction, you get that direction, and you go that way, and you get all that stuff. By doing that, one kid would have inherited a small patch of worthless desert and then ran into the ocean and not had any land, while the other would have inherited the rest of the entire continent. This would have turned out to be all-out war between the kids fighting for the better plot of land. That is why God sent an angel to Noah, and that is the only possible way Noah could have mapped out the world and divided it for his children. There is no possible way that Noah himself could have known what the new world looked like, and no way he could have mapped it out, especially in that much detail. So the evidence shows divine intervention at a time when the world was so small, maps only covered about 2,000 square miles at best. So if this isn't amazing evidence, I don't know what is. So I hope you enjoyed, and until next time.